The Man Who Waited Half a Lifetime. The evening light filtered through the curtains, golden and soft, like memories slipping through time. Morgan Freeman sat alone in his study, hands resting gently on the arms of his chair. Outside, the world hummed quietly. Inside, it was still. He closed his eyes and let his mind drift backward, past the fame, past the applause, past the accolades that now lined his walls. He returned to a night long ago, a night when he sat in a different room, in a different life, wondering if he had wasted everything. He had been born into poverty so deep it felt like drowning. Mississippi in the 1930s was unforgiving. His family had almost nothing. His parents separated when he was young, and he was passed between relatives like a suitcase no one wanted to carry for long. Some nights there was no dinner, just silence and hunger gnawing at his stomach. He learned early that the world did not notice children like him. He was invisible, but inside that invisible boy burned a quiet fire, a need to be seen, to be heard, to tell stories that mattered. He wanted to act. When he told people, they looked at him with pity. Teachers shook their heads. "Your face isn't right for it," one said. Directors dismissed him. "Your voice is too soft. You don't command a room." And underneath it all, always unspoken but ever present, was the color of his skin. Hollywood in those years had no space for him. He auditioned anyway, hundreds of times, and hundreds of times he was told no. The years crawled by. His 20s came and went, then his 30s. He worked every small job he could find just to survive. He swept floors as a janitor. He repaired stage props in dusty theaters. He delivered newspapers in the cold morning dark. He worked as an usher, watching other people's dreams play out on screens, while his own remained stuck in waiting rooms. For a time, he performed as a puppeteer on a children's television show, hidden behind felt and string, his face still unseen, his voice still unheard. Some days he couldn't afford a bus ticket. He walked for miles, his shoes worn thin, his body tired, his hope thinner still. Friends his age had moved on. They had families, steady jobs, security, and Morgan? He was still chasing shadows. One night, when he was nearly 40 years old, he sat alone in a cramped apartment. The walls were thin. He could hear his neighbors arguing through the plaster. The light bulb overhead flickered weakly. He stared at his reflection in a cracked mirror. His face had aged. Lines had formed around his eyes. Gray was beginning to creep into his hair. And for the first time, he allowed himself to think the thought he had fought for so long. Maybe it's too late. The words hung in the air like smoke. He had given his entire life to this dream. And what did he have to show for it? Nothing. No career, no recognition, no proof that any of it had mattered. He sat there in the silence, feeling the weight of all those years pressing down on his chest. And he wondered, should I let it go? But something in him, stubborn, quiet, unbreakable, refused. Not because he believed success was coming, but because he didn't know how to be anyone else. Then at 50 years old, something shifted. A small role came his way. Nothing grand. A supporting character in a film most people wouldn't remember. But he took it, and then another role, and another. Slowly, quietly, like dawn breaking after the longest night, people began to notice. His voice, the one they'd called too soft, became iconic. His presence, the one they'd dismissed, became magnetic. His face, the one they'd said wasn't right, became unforgettable. In his 50s, the roles grew. Driving Miss Daisy, Glory, Unforgiven. By his 60s, he was a legend. The Shawshank Redemption, C7 Ian, Million Dollar Baby. Hollywood finally saw him, but he had been there all along. Now sitting in his study with the evening light warming his face, Morgan opened his eyes. He thought about that younger man in the cracked mirror, the one who almost gave up, and he wished he could go back and tell him, hold on, just a little longer. He spoke softly as if to someone who needed to hear it across time. People think life has a schedule, that if you haven't made it by 30 or 40, you've failed. But that's not true. Dreams don't expire. They don't spoil with age. They deepen. They grow richer. I spent 30 years in the shadows, 30 years of hearing no, 30 years of wondering if I was fooling myself. But those years weren't wasted. They were shaping me, teaching me patience, building something inside me that couldn't be rushed. When my moment finally came, I wasn't the young man who wanted it desperately. I was the seasoned man who could carry it with grace. Success didn't arrive late. It arrived exactly when I was ready. He paused, his voice warm and steady. So if you're still waiting, if the years feel heavy, if your dream feels distant, don't stop. Don't measure yourself by other people's timelines. Your journey is your own. And sometimes the greatest roles in life don't come when you're young and hungry. They come when you're older, wiser, and finally strong enough to handle them. The lesson: you are never too old. It is never too late. The wait is not punishment. It is preparation. And when your moment comes, you will understand. Every year, every struggle, every doubt was building you into the person who could finally receive what you've been waiting for. Don't give up. Your story isn't over. It's just beginning.